He has called for massive protest in response to his expected arrest. There are certainly isolated calls for violence online among his supporters, what the Associated Press characterized today as incendiary but isolated calls for civil war and violence and killing people. But you do also have high-profile Trump supporters, like this guy, who we do have a mugshot of, disgraced former New York police commissioner and convicted felon Bernie Kerik, now a high-profile Trump supporter. He is now calling for law enforcement to mutiny, for law enforcement at all levels to refuse to enforce the law if there's any indictment against Donald Trump. You've also got lots of high-profile Trump supporters leaning on the governor of Florida, saying that if Trump is indicted and he refuses to voluntarily turn himself in, then the Florida governor, Ron DeSantis, should refuse law enforcement cooperation to extradite Trump to New York to face charges, that DeSantis should call out the Florida National Guard or something, or have some other kind of state versus federal arms standoff where, I guess, Trump will hide indefinitely in his Florida house. And then there'll be like a war or something, I guess, to try to stop him from facing potential charges on falsification of business records. The reason this stuff matters is because it's one thing to wish for, to try to use violence and intimidation to constrain prosecutors. Right? That is not something we do in this country, but I think nobody believes that's a Rubicon that former President Trump doesn't want to cross, not after January 6th. He knows what intimidation and violence by his supporters can do for him. And so, therefore, we have to watch that closely, and we're going to be watching very closely the logistics and the machinations of these possible prosecutions, because he's calling for large-scale protests, because we know he's not shy about the impact of violence potentially benefiting him, and the impact of intimidation in terms of whether or not it can constrain those who he perceives as his enemies. We get that. What's worse than that, though, is if he wants to break the system, is if he wants to break the legal system in response to the legal system threatening him. And beyond just threatening violence, you know, that's something that all the other hundreds, all the other thousands of public corruption indictments in this country have not previously brought to our door. But that is what not just former President Trump, but also Republicans more broadly are playing with right now. I mean, right now we have Republicans in the state legislature in Georgia passing themselves a new law by which they empower themselves to remove prosecutors in the middle of cases that the Republicans don't like. Georgia Republicans have passed legislation to undo the independence of law enforcement in Georgia, if that's what it takes to prevent the law being enforced against their leader. Today, Trump's lawyers in Georgia filed a motion to have the prosecutor who's leading the investigation into Trump, they filed a motion to have her removed from that case, while the bill that would allow Republicans in the state legislature to remove her from the case is on its way to that Republican governor's desk. I mean, what do they think is going to be the outcome there in Georgia if they do this, right? I mean, they just want to set a new standard, right? As long as there are Republicans controlling the state legislature there, prosecutors in Georgia can only bring criminal charges against Democrats and not Republicans, because if you bring them against Republicans, the Republicans in the state legislature will take you out of your job. I mean, is that what they're trying to set up? Is that how they think things ought to work in Georgia? That's how things ought to be changed in Georgia, so they work like that now. And the reason that change is justified is because, well, Donald Trump might get in trouble for some stuff. It's one thing to not want your guy indicted. It's another thing, and a very bad thing, to threaten violence and intimidation if your guy does get indicted. But if your reaction to your guy potentially getting indicted is that you're going to get rid of the system by which people get indicted, that's a bigger problem for the whole country. And it's not just Georgia. Federally now, we have Republicans in Congress trying to summon the New York prosecutor to Capitol Hill to give testimony, as if they've got jurisdiction over him in this matter, as if they, as Congress, can somehow constrain him from bringing New York state charges against an alleged criminal, as if they can somehow stop him from putting people on trial for allegedly breaking New York state law. Republican House Speaker Kevin McCarthy is making these threats against the New York prosecutor. He's encouraging Republican members of Congress who lead congressional committees that they should haul in this New York prosecutor to try somehow to stop it. And so, yes, we're going to look at all of that tonight, and we're going to get some expert help to try to understand it. But we can be clear-eyed and confident here about what's new and what isn't, about what poses a challenge to our system of government and what is our system of government. And, you know, we've all seen it. Every time a public official gets charged with a crime, they get that look in their eye, right? They always say, oh, it's political persecution. My enemies are just out to get me because of my position on taxes or gay rights or tort reform or whatever. Or they say, it's only because I'm so effective as a champion of the people. That's why they're after me. You know, they all try that kind of an argument. But they end up being memorable only for the quality of their mugshots. Some of them get convicted, some of them get acquitted, some of them get charges dropped, some of them keep committing more crimes and get superseding indictments laid on top of the initial charges, and then we get two mugshots for the price of one. But our system of government can handle it. Our system of government can demonstrably and absolutely handle the prosecution of alleged crimes committed by public officials and former public officials. It happens all the time. It will not break us. It does not break us unless the political right, in its support of Donald Trump, decides that the prosecution of that particular former public official is reason enough to break our system of government, to break the legal system with not just threats of violence and intimidation, but by seizing partisan and political control of prosecutors' offices. If former President Trump gets indicted, yes, it's unprecedented. But there is no inherent crisis in that for us as Americans. Watch who tries to make it one.